This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hey guys, this is Venice, and I've got a message from a friend of mine about my favorite podcast.
It's your boy, Flavor Flav in full effect. Check this out, everybody. I want y'all to go check out TJ.
What's good, everybody? TJ Johnson here for Voice from the Underground. I am the most handsome.
Big Has.
And I'm smoking my cigar, of course.
You know what I'm saying? The Dutch.
You pick me up in an Uber and a PT Cruiser, I'm calling Lyft.
Cause they be fighting the power, talking about social issues, politics, you know what I'm saying?
And we're not even that good. Right, we're terrible. Terrible. Tangents all over the place.
And not only that, but they be keeping it fun with the sports, music, comics, and movies too.
Am I allowed to talk?
I think no, not right now.
Shut up, colonizer!
You know what I'm saying? He on Twitter at VFU Podcast. Yo, you can find them. So check 1, 2. This is Flavor Flav. Yeah, boy.
Okay, what Flav was trying to say is, check out Voice from the Underground on your favorite podcast network.
Voice from the Underground.
This episode of BiCurean, we spent time with Lorena Garcia. Garcia shared about her recent Senate campaign and the current state of affairs in U.S. politics.
Hi, I'm Eric.
And I'm Aisla.
And together we are the hosts of the BiCurean podcast.
BiCurean is our answer to the polarizing culture we live in.
Tired of feeling under siege and looking for ways to get involved? Then come be a part of a different way of thinking.
Everything from politics to geek culture to current events that polarize us as a society, we explore multiple ways of looking at things.
Welcome to the show.
Hi, Eric.
Hello.
I'm really looking forward to the show for a number of reasons.
So we are going to try some new things, and we have a fantastic guest.
Yes.
And it's a good thing that we know her personally, and she's willing to be our guinea pig. So
Right, because she'll forgive us, or at least hopefully. So let's say hello to our wonderful, fabulous guest, Lorena Garcia.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Happy
Welcome.
to be here.
Yeah. So obviously we know how we know you, but our listeners don't. Let's go there first, and maybe you can introduce yourself.
And yeah, how we know you and or like why we want, to have you on here. But maybe make it a short list because there's so many reasons.
Okay. You want me to tell them, or are you?
Oh yeah, no. Why do you? Talk about you, and then we'll add to it.
Okay. Let's see. So I am a Colorado native, born and raised here. Have dedicated my life to doing social justice work through nonprofit work and policy advocacy, and most recently tried something totally wild and crazy. I ran for U.S. Senate in Colorado, and we built an amazing movement, I would say. We built an amazing team. And that didn't entirely work out. You know what, not by anything that we did. The campaign, the powers that be were really not interested in us being on the ballot. So through different court cases and different mechanisms that we don't have control over, they successfully kept us off the ballot. So unfortunately, all the work that we did, people didn't even get a chance to vote. So now just keeping up the work that I've always been doing and fighting for social justice issues, more specifically right now in early childhood education and in immigrant rights. And I know Aisla from a long time ago when we were just tiny little kids. Not really, but a long time ago.
It does feel like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Back when
Well, yeah. and I'll admit, so I met you around the same time as you were announcing that you were going to run for Senate. And Isla filled me in on some of the background, but it was fascinating, and I totally understand why you were frustrated. I admit that after seeing grassroots politics and what it takes to even get started in that, it's like, wow, that was intense. And I do feel like you did not really even get a fair shake. And I honestly think we could probably do a show on the pros and cons of the party system and how that works against the majority of people, but
sign me up.
So
yeah, that's actually a great future topic. And I will say that, so I do have this one question I want to ask before we get into things. And I also want to add that when you're talking about your campaign, I have never seen anyone be everywhere and work a full-time job the way that you did.
No, I was impressed. I heard what Aisla was doing to help you and what you were doing, and I'm like, wow. And that was to get as far as you got, and I don't even know what you could have done more, right? So yeah.
I mean, it looked like you had a time turner. Let's just be honest. Like there was no idea how you did that. So Lorena, we have a new idea for how we want to start the show. And we've nominated you to be the first guest to try it out with us. And
awesome.
Are you good with that?
Let's do it. I'm so ready.
So we want to ask you, what do you think BiCurean means?
Is that really fair? Because you've explained it to me.
It's actually really fair because that's a good test for whether or not I explained it at all well.
Or memorably.
There you go, right?
Or even if I heard it right. So BiCurean means that it's okay to be like, to not be set in your ways, to not just have a single thought process. It's okay that even within ourselves, and I think just by the sake of we'll talk about perhaps like dualities, like we are often in conflict with ourselves in the sense that we might agree with half of this argument and disagree with half of this argument, but it doesn't make either side right or wrong. And then I think what I love about the Curian part is that it facilitates ongoing investigation, because one of the greatest things about being human, I think, is just being curious. And then you have to satisfy that curiosity. So you're going to study and research and listen and learn and challenge what you learn and challenge what you haven't heard and what you want to hear. And that's what I think it means.
So let me be the first to say congratulations. That is the correct answer.
Yes!
Only because I literally don't think I could have summarized what our mission or the show has been about in almost 3 years, as you just did right there. You just nailed and said it better than I think I've ever managed to do.
Same here. This is the reason that Lorena is amazing in activism. She knows how to distill information into communicatable, understandable sentences. So
no, that was amazing.
That really was.
maybe the politics this year paid off.
Yeah.
But no, that was exactly like the whole concept when we started, was the idea of being able to look at both sides, critically think about it, be curious, but also, be secure enough in your own beliefs to have a conversation with somebody that doesn't have to become angry or bitter or hard, and to actually have a moment of maybe compassion for somebody else's point of view, even if you don't agree with it. So no, but that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Right on.
I really liked also, as you were expressing that, talking about that conflict piece, it was a subconscious instinct. However, you laid it out really well that ultimately is the dualities that end up creating the conflict. So we're definitely always more than two. However, it's often those things that we perceive to be in opposition, and typically that ends up being two things that we end up suffering because of, or getting agitated about, or being afraid as a result of. So I appreciate that, because as you named that, I was like, oh, right, that was there in my instinctive thing, but not articulated. So thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
That's a fun exercise.
Yeah.
So thank you for being a part of that. We're gonna do that more with different guests and use that as kind of a kickoff point for. To be honest, I am happy to share this with our listeners at any point in time. If I have one thing that I could do on a daily basis with this show or in any conversation, it's to just get people to think critically and understand that the more polarized we're getting, the worse it's getting, and that we need to understand that other people have beliefs. They could be hateful, they could be unethical, they could be a lot of things, but we do have to reach a point of understanding eventually, or the other option I'm becoming more and more of a fan of is maybe the Western United States just cedes and we strike out on our own with people who agree with us more. So that's really my options at this point.
So
well, I think it's like, oh, sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was thinking along with that in the topic that you had brought up around, do our electoral process and does our democracy even work for us really? And that's a really great BiCurean conversation because in respect, it's talking about, does our electoral process actually allow for curiosity to happen? Or are we prohibited from our abilities to actually investigate and to research and to have these in-depth conversations to really challenge our own perspectives?
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting to me is that I do feel like there's been a shift. And not that I feel like, I mean, if you read the history of the Senate and congressional chambers, there were periods of time where people like violently attacked each other. So when we say that modern politics is like the most evolved in history, it's not.
No, it's not.
You can go through and be like, wow, that was amazing. And in a larger sense, there just seems to be this instinctive need to win at all costs in a conversation.
Yeah.
And that overrides our ability to actually learn, grow, and connect. And so how can we have political conversations that are also going to be exchanges of curiosity and development, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly why I think we need to just abolish the party system. But that's an entire other. That's an entire other podcast.
Again, like topic number 3 that we could go over, because the fact that I have to lump in with people I don't entirely agree with, and again, this will be our teaser for the next time we have you on. The fact that you had to compromise things, I watched you do it in a conversation with somebody at your mom's at an event that you were hosting, where I saw somebody telling you were going to have to compromise things to play ball with the Democratic Party in order to get their support. And from that point on, I knew, the system is broken. You can't just be yourself. I don't even know how much you talked to her, and I don't even remember her name. Isla did talk to her at length, and that was the takeaway, was this is all great, but what are you doing to honor and request permission and kiss the ring of the Democratic Party? And I was like, there we go. This is going to be hard, because that's the first game.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between compromise to achieve a policy outcome versus compromising your values. I think those are two different things.
True. Yeah.
And I think, for example, I would never compromise my values. And I was very clear about that. And I was challenged again at some other meeting where someone was like, it seems like you're just trying to run so you can then destroy the Democratic Party, or so, I don't know how it went, but it was basically saying that I couldn't be trusted as a Democrat because I don't speak flowers and spread gold all over every single Democrat. And I was like, why would I? Do we really want if what you're asking for is a whole bunch of robots that are going to be walking in the same line without any sort of differentiation, then you can join that other party. But if what we're trying to do is build an area and a space where we can actually have conversation, where we can challenge each other to be better, then why are you afraid when I challenge this other candidate to be better?
Yeah. Nope, bingo. Again, you said it better than I could. That fundamentally, there's a flaw in the thinking that you have to get in line to even bring your values to bear.
Well, and to bring them to the public, right? I know for me, one of the things that I've continued to be frustrated about is that the choices we have are not easily noted in the larger scheme of things. So, for example, long before there were 2 final people, working to be on the primary, there was this shift to talking about Hickenlooper versus Romanoff. And all of the other candidates, not just you, were suddenly no longer being considered as part of the presented, I should say, not even considered, but presented as part of the options, which, and it's tricksy, right? Because there's a way in which, I know you tried to bring it up and other candidates and people don't necessarily hear that as it's not about you being like, I wish people would notice me. It's about these other candidates saying we bring something different to the table, and the media is not giving people access to these ideas as like strongly valid choices. They keep trying to diminish them. And then we have this conversation about what's electable after our options have been diminished. And it's kind of a frustrating experience because it feels like one of those like self-fulfilling prophecies rather than actually letting people make a choice.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, I challenged a radio station had me and 3 of the other women candidates on their station, and they talked about like, it was after we were all out of the race, by the way.
Yeah.
And they were talking about like, we just really want people to know about you guys. And I called them out and I said, yeah, this is great. A little too late. Why didn't you have us on your show before? I don't know any of these other candidates that were ever invited to come and speak. And then on top of that, it's the language that you use. You choose to use lesser known before our names, or you choose to use words that would already instill doubt in readers and listeners' minds because you are already tainting the water instead of being actually just objective in what you're supposed to do and providing the information for your audience to make up their own minds.
Yeah, right. You can say that again. Like that's the part that was on the inside, like, and I wasn't super involved. However, the amount that I got to see, I was like, wow, like this is really painful. Like we do not get access. We have to seek it out multiple places. And then we also have to overlook our own instincts. When the media says like it's a 2-person race, you sort of default to that. Like I knew it wasn't, but there are plenty of people I talked to who was like, they asked me because they knew I was very supportive of you. And they were just like, is Lorena done? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No. She's going strong.
Right.
Well, and again, I think we should probably touch on this. Do we have a topic? I don't know. It has been a confusing week. It has been a confusing couple of weeks. Everybody I talk to is literally having fever dreams right now. Not necessarily about anything specific. It just feels like a stressful time. But
well, according to Google, panic attacks is one of the most highly like searched terms right now. So yeah, I mean, it's understandable. There's a lot going on that is quite panic inducing.
So I'm actually just admitting we were going to talk about a topic. We could talk about whatever. I don't remember what we were going to talk about because I am a mess.
If you have something interesting to suggest, I imagine that it will be totally into it.
So, well, I mean, if you're happy to talk about this, Lorena, I think people would love to kind of hear what it was like to basically. You were in the race months and months and months before Hickenlooper was, and let's call it what it is. He's now our senatorial candidate coming up in less than 70 days. It was his plan B, which already kind of put me on a back foot with it because he had designs on being president along with like half the population that I could tell. and he's one of the few people that I think was in a position where he could. I mean, what was your impression? You were obviously paying very close attention to it all.
It was I've never really before this have participated too much in electoral politics. And this what I voted, I walked doors for candidates. I knew there was, obviously like there was insider politics and that, there's people that are groomed to run for certain seats. And I think that ultimately what it came down to was seeing the people who are being groomed to run for these seats are not people that will ever fight for me. is really why I decided, you know what, screw the system, screw what I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to run. I'm going to run for this seat now, because just because I haven't been tapped on the shoulder, or just because the Democratic Party hasn't come and asked me to run, doesn't mean that I can't. And I think that's one of the facades that electoral politics has placed in the idea that not everyone should run for office or can run for office, when the reality is that's exactly what our system has been built on. That was the original intention of our supposed democratic government.
Yeah.
And representative government. And so when I was running, and being the first one in the race, I think was super helpful, because then, I was able to start early and get out there and meet some folks. And, a lot of people looked at me and were like, what? I mean, I don't know how many times I got even just a comment, you don't look older than 25. And it's like, well, I am. And so what, and, these different things that automatically people would, they give this criticism right off the bat in their nice way, to basically say you don't look like a U.S. Senate candidate.
Mm.
And no, I don't look like a U.S. Senate candidate, and what we consider what a U.S. Senate candidate should look like, right? Because we've never had a U.S. Senate candidate that looks like me before.
Which was part of the point.
Right. But now we have. And so now if anyone else who looks like me, who's young looking, who's not white, who's not male, who isn't straight, decides to run for office, no one can tell them you don't look like a U.S. Senate candidate anymore. That's something that I'm super proud of. No one can ever tell them that again.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. And I'm kind of horrified by the reality that you probably were judged on all of those things, probably multiple times a day, possibly by the same people, or possibly by all different people in different ways.
There's this one, I was just appalled. There was this one moment, it was after this, after a forum, and I have to admit, I did really well at this forum, because I couldn't even get around the table because people just swarmed the table to talk to me afterwards. And I'm looking around trying to see if I can have if there's any volunteers that I can get some help with, to get contact information and stuff. And I'm seeing these other candidates that are standing on their own. And finally I'm about to leave, and this one gentleman comes up. He doesn't even deserve the name gentleman. This one dude comes up and he says, it's like, hey, you're pretty fiery. You're pretty spunky. You kind of remind me of AOC. And I was like, oh, well, thank you. And he just kind of looks at me. I was like, that's a good thing, right? And he's like, well, I don't know, because she's young and pretty. You're young and pretty. And I was like, yo, sir, you can stop right there. Because if you're going to try and say anything after that, you've already lost me. And he's like, why don't we, that's a compliment. I was like, I didn't ask you for this compliment. I didn't ask you for it. And it's inappropriate. If you're going to talk to me about the crux of anything that I said today, if you disagree with anything I said today, let's have a conversation. It's like, no, I think everything you said is great. So it was that. And at that point I was like, well, thank you so much. I hope that you will consider voting for the policies that I talked about, and have a good one. And I think in that area, it was just this feeling where it's and not just me, because there's every candidate has to deal with some form or another, unless you're white, older, and straight. And to me, it was just another reminder of okay, as a non-white, male, straight candidate, I am going to have to work and continue working so much harder. But this is the thing. It's that this happens. This happens in your everyday life. It's not just in running for office.
Yeah.
I have to work just as hard. I have to work harder than my male counterparts in the nonprofit ED world.
Mm-hmm.
and that just, it just is what it is right now. But that's why we have to fight to change it, because it shouldn't be, it is what it is.
Right. Something that you said, oh, did you have a follow-up? I don't want to.
Well, I was just going to say, we can play a percentage thing. Percentage-wise, in your interactions, how often do you think people heard your policies versus seeing age, race, sexual orientation, all of that stuff, gender, all of that stuff before they even heard what you had to say, or possibly even didn't hear what you had to say?
Oh, gosh. I don't know.
I was looking to quantify
Pretty
it,
high. Okay, let's say maybe 75%, because the reason why I can say this, because a lot of the comments were things like, wow, you really surprised me. Wow, you were so knowledgeable. Things like there were those comments of like, oh my gosh, you actually know what you're talking about. No, that wasn't ever said to me, but it was that motivate, that intention.
The super microaggressive way that people say things like, oh, you're so smart for a woman.
There was this one moment. I just was like, okay. I was handing out my flyer and we started talking, and this one woman asked me, she was with her group of friends, and she was like, what do you think about the Kentucky race? Do you think that, I forget her name now, the one who's running
Amy
again.
McGrath versus was it another Booker? I feel like I got
yes.
Okay,
Charles Booker.
It was the other, because there's two, right? That were running, one for president, one for Senate, or
yes, there was Cory Booker running for president and Charles Booker running for Senate. Now, Amy, so this woman asked me, she's like, gosh, do you really think she has a chance? I mean, I don't know if Kentucky is really ready for her. And I was like, why not? And she was like, well, she just looks so lesbian. I was like, what? And her friends were like, what do you mean? She's like, I mean, look at her. She just looks so like manly. I mean, she's married to a man, I know, but she just looks it. And I was like, okay. And I just walked away, right? Mm-hmm. During the forum, one of the questions I was asked opened up the opportunity for me to talk about my wife. And so I talked about my wife and our relationship. And afterwards, you could tell she was so mortified. She came up to me. She was like one of the first ones that came up to me and was like, I'll sign your petition.
There you go.
Yeah. And I was like, all right, you just have to be homophobic and then sign my petition.
Well,
and let's be clear here, right? You were talking to people that in theory were probably there. They might be a swing voter, but they probably were not doing recon for any hyper religious, political organizations or something. So
yeah,
in theory, you're amongst peers of at least common goals and values. So.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you brought up early in the race that I found to be really interesting, and I think our listeners would actually be interested in, is we tend to judge the possible success or the current success of a campaign by how much money they've raised. And yet we know that women and people of color and women of color tend to raise significantly less than their counterparts, and they still win. So to me, that means making money sort of our indicator of success kind of leaves out some of these other realities about what can make a campaign successful.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think one of the challenges with trying to move away from that narrative is that when candidates that do raise more money win, it supports that narrative. So for example, let's look at John Hickenlooper. He outraised pretty much the entire rest of the U.S. Senate pool together. And he won the primary handedly. He won every single county except for one. Now, some people might say, well, that's because he raised more money. While I might say, or maybe the one last standing opponent was just not the right opponent.
Right.
And I think the other thing is how political campaigns are run. There's this political training manual. There's this handbook. And if there's actually a handbook, I don't know, because if they offered it to me, I would have thrown it away. But there's this there's this formula that you're supposed to run political campaigns with. And a lot of that has to do with money, and a lot of that has to do with ads and mailers, and where are you going to spend that money? So when you come from a background like mine, and like many of these other really amazing progressive candidates that come from organizing and come from social justice work, you learn you can achieve so much with a fraction of what everyone else has. So thinking about our petition gathering, John Hickenlooper spent like $430,000 to collect 14,000 signatures. My team spent about $36,000 to collect 120 less than 14,000 signatures.
It's still painful.
But
still, like, that's so impressive,
like,
right? That's like less than a tenth.
But that wasn't even, that money was spent, and it wasn't even that much actually. That money was spent just on maintaining my teeny tiny staff that I had. You know, it wasn't that we hired extra canvassers. It wasn't that we we didn't pay anything extra except for having to, you know, buy lanyards and stuff. But that's the reality, is like, sure, you can go ahead and pretend, because we live in this like capitalist society where we think that money is the answer to everything, without recognizing actually, no, it's not. And when we see and we look at different races across the country, we can also witness, we can see when candidates are not just relying on money, but they're relying on the resources that they have, and resources meaning the connections that they have, the community support that they have, their family, their friends. Like, how do you, like, going back to the system that allows our communities to survive, and like, which is bartering, you know, like, these are things that help prop up not only just candidates, but the values and the issues that we are running on. Because a lot of it is, many of us run thinking there's no way in hell I'm going to win, but I'm still going to run because I need to talk about this issue so more people are aware of it. And the investment and the sacrifice and the time is worth it. And there's some that run. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, that feels like the old school way of doing it. And I feel like when finance really got involved, my impression is that it's almost just a validation thing. Like, being able to say I raised more money is an attempt to convince people, like, I'm raising so much money because people believe in me and you should too. I mean, it's like the base level herd mentality, right? So I didn't mean to cut you off. It popped into my head that I'm like, no, I think that's why the finance thing took off that way. And that's why the campaigns advertise how much money they're getting. Because it does. Well, it didn't get them any farther. It didn't get Hickenlooper more than what you got.
Money has always had some form of role in politics. But I will say, here in Colorado, money didn't have as much of a role in politics, and really across the nation, until Jared Polis decided to run for office.
Yeah, his primary campaign was one of the most high spend for the Democratic primary for Congress in the Boulder County area that had ever occurred.
And when he ran for a volunteer position on the state school board, he spent $1 million.
Wow.
They had never spent more than $10,000 on one of those races before he wanted to run for that seat. You know, so he had the money, said, I'm going to use it to win. And then he decided, him and these other rich people in Colorado were like, yeah, that's how we do it. We just need to invest heavily in these races. So then they started pumping all of this money in these races, tons and tons and tons of money in these races. The other thing is, really, races until before President Truman was in office, the idea of retail politics didn't even exist. You know, because he was the owner of a newspaper. So he said, oh, I'm going to use this to my advantage. Well, his opponent was then like, wait, but how do I get that? Now I'm going to have to buy ads to get it. And that's how it started, like, shifting into that. So, like, there has always been money. There hasn't always been this amount of money. And, like, unfortunately, because we live in a world where everything costs something,
yeah,
you know, like, I can't just have my staff without paying them.
Right.
Like, but it doesn't mean that it has to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. One of the things that we were super clear about in the race was like, we were raising what we need.
Right.
And so we were very transparent about what our budget would look like. We had for a long time on Facebook, the pinned post was what our monthly budget is.
Yeah.
So people could see like, oh, wait, so you can accomplish all this with just $15,000?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can.
Right. And some of it does like rest on sort of your inexhaustibility. Like there's what you can do, and then there's what's sustainable. And I do know that that's something that those of us who've worked in grassroots organizing and activism have had to learn sort of painfully. We'll sort of spend our time and our energy and, and honestly wear ourselves out physically serving a cause, and then realize like, oh, this isn't actually sustainable. So there's I think a balance. I personally would like to move away from capitalism. I've really been convinced. And it wasn't hard. But, and at the same time, I'd love to see us also really value whatever that looks like, the people who do that kind of work. Because there's absolutely this weird disconnect that I feel like we run into. If you're doing something like Eric's a professional musician, but he can't do that full time because people don't want to invest in art at a level that allows for him to do that, right? Like he has to split his time. And lots of people who are in activism and art and other things that they enjoy end up getting put into that difficult choice, right? And so it's that balance of like, where do we value? And you had a great idea for this with the GDP, I think, but like, where do we value the labor of people that are doing something that's more heart-centered and or service-oriented or altruistic, right?
I think that we, when we put a dollar value on everything that we need to just survive, right? So we have to pay for water. We have to pay for our housing. We have to pay for our energy that we consume. We have to pay for food. We have to pay for everything. God, we have to pay for oxygen.
We have to pay for someone to take our poop away.
I mean, come on. Like, and so because of that, then it's like, instead of understanding that there are some basic things that a society and that a people need just to be able to survive. And if they have that, it's like, let's talk about, like, Maslow is brilliant, right? Maslow's hierarchy of need. Like, we have these things that we just need, but to force people to have to purchase them, to force people to have to pay for them, is what causes people to get into this mode. And it's what causes society to get to this place of like dog eat dog. And I love dogs. So that idea just drives me crazy. Or, like, we're living in this world of crabs. We're all just trying to like climb over each other just to survive. Thinking when the pandemic hit in the first month, so much so, and this was something that we had on our website, like there's like, I don't even remember now, but I think it's like 30% of the American population has a significant amount of savings, enough to be able to survive 3 months. The rest do not. And when the pandemic hit, the first month, even just in the first month, we did a poll within the campaign, and of the 300 people across the state that filled out that survey, 36% of them were already not going to be able to make rent. Had I lost my job, I would have been one of them.
Yeah, I feel like this is like the great equalizer. Other countries shut down, and honestly, a lot more hardcore than we did. And I'm sure things aren't great in Italy, but I've not heard about like people starving to death, losing their houses, their entire economy collapsing. Like I'm assuming it's not great. But to be honest, if it was bad, I'm certain that somebody would have looked it up and brought it to my attention at some point. I just don't think it was as bad. We had a house of cards, and a literal unforeseeable thing that was absolutely foreseeable. And let's talk about rainy days for a minute. We just had nothing to deal with this, and the cleanup on this is going to wreck us for a while.
Well, it's also the idea of why are we, with the reason why we are still in this place, and the reason why you're seeing even more and more and more families living out of their cars, I don't know if you've noticed, just out in the street, you're seeing more cars packed with their belongings because the moratorium on evictions has expired. So now people are actually being thrown out. And so, but the thing is that we are operating, and our government operates on the idea that if we just save these businesses and save these corporations, they'll keep these people employed and everything will be fine, instead of actually recognizing, no, that's not the case, because we have put so much, exactly as you said, we have put so much on this fragile house of cards that instead of actually investing in people, making sure that people were receiving the checks to be able to pay rent, to buy food, to pay their energy, our economy would be in a much better place right now than where it is when they sent trillions of dollars to bail out corporations. And where did that money go? It certainly didn't go to the employees. It didn't go to keep people staffed. It didn't go to support employees from working from home with childcare. It didn't do any of that.
But it's amazing too, because I mean, so many of those big corporations that we bailed out have basically said, yeah, we're just waiting for this whole thing to end, and then we're going to lay off a lot of people. The airlines, I mean, have said numerous times, like, yeah, no, technically we lose the bajillion dollars that we just got if we let anybody go before October or September or whatever. But the minute that hits, we're going to let everyone go. Like, you know,
they're
admitting
a ransom. Yeah, and they're putting a ransom on our government, saying, give us $25 billion or we're going to lay off like some outrageous amount of people.
Right. Well, and I'm trying to find, I have my phone out, not to be rude, but there's this guy, Dan Price. I don't know if you've heard of him. His company's called Gravity. And in 2015, he decided, he was a CEO. He made $1.1 million a year as a CEO from the company that he founded. And he was hiking with a friend of his who worked for him. And she was like, yeah, I can't really afford X, Y, or Z. And he was like, whoa, that's so weird. And he found out she made like $45,000, $50,000 a year, which was a reasonable salary for her position at the time. Right. And he was like, actually, I don't like that. And I'm the boss. So he reduced his salary to $70,000 a year. And he increased every single person at his work to a minimum of $70,000 a year, because he read some study it's actually, he said, he found out later it was 75, but he read a study that said, $70,000 a year is what's needed to allow someone to like be able to achieve sort of relaxation and happiness.
Wow.
And Rush Limbaugh was like, this guy did this experiment in socialism and I can't wait to see it destroyed. And actually what happened was he became incredibly successful. Like his company flourished. And he's outspoken. I'll send you some links to what he says. It's amazing. He's super outspoken about it. And when the pandemic hit, they actually just put out an anonymous spreadsheet and they were like, what can people afford to do? He reduced his salary to $0 when the pandemic hit because he was like, yeah, I'm fine. and then people in the company got on and like said, oh, I can take, a 10% and be fine or whatever. So they were able to people got to opt in. The whole company came together. They didn't have to do any layoffs. And then they did get a loan from the government and then were able to bring everybody back up to their 70,000. And while they're not back fully on track, they are already back in, better production and moving towards hitting good sales goals and all of that. And he's calling out like all sorts of things that I think you're right on board with. Like he's like this whole like, what's the marketplace value of your job? He's like, it's a made up number. Employees he's like, we make that number up. It has nothing to do with the value of your work or what we need for the company. But it's just really because he did it. He actually took the risk and it worked out incredibly successfully. And I mean, he didn't do it for like the first 4 years. And he did have like the resources to like do things like say, well, I won't, I can take a zero pay or whatever. So, I mean, there's balances, but he did actually have to give some things up. And he said the biggest part was like, there's that part of him that's like, I was a successful founder. I did a startup of a company and I'm never going to be a Zuckerberg because I gave that up. I said, no, I'm not going to have that money. So I'll never have that recognition. I'll never have that acknowledgement. And there's that like ego part of him, he said, that like really is like, well, I wish I had that. Like, it's not even the money as much that he misses as that like his ego yearns for the recognition. And I think he'll get it in a different way. I mean, like what he's doing is so powerful. And it's the shift we need to see, right? Like if everybody were in that situation and they track more than like financial success. He's like, you know, this many people in our company now feel like they can afford to have a child or buy a home or have paid off their debt or were able to care for a family member. Like they track that as part of their like company profits in addition to how many sales and how much they made last year and all of that. Like it's a really cool way, I think, to bring sort of the whole story together.
Well, I think that's I want to read more about him and the company Gravity, because I think that's a great argument to shift away from such a capitalistic mentality and short-term returns and how do we measure the stock market?
Right.
And because I mean, like all of this conversation of, well, the stock market has been doing great, so everyone is doing great and our economy is booming. And you're just kind of like, really? Because my pay hasn't increased. I haven't been able to increase my employees' pay. How like homelessness is on the rise. Wages are stagnant. So just because the rich people are measuring their success based on the stock market and short-term returns, which I wonder, is Gravity a public company? I doubt it.
Yeah, right? I was going to say that they're not, based on what I saw. And yeah, to your point, they absolutely would not have gotten away with that if they were beholden to shareholders.
Because then there's shareholders that are investing just because they want money back, because they don't give a crap about the triple P bottom line, like people, profit, and planet. They only care about the profit part. You know, they would never allow that to happen. And great. That to me, I'm like, great, let's get away from this, like this public option mentality that only a few people can actually buy into as well. Mm-hmm. You know, stocks, I did an experiment. I bought stock a long time ago. I had like $100. And so I don't even know what stocks it was, but I bought like a cute few shares here, and then it went up and I bought a few shares somewhere else. And then ultimately I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I am not benefiting in any way except for maybe getting cents to the dollar after a year in this. But the people who are getting not just my money, but the millions and billions of other investment dollars because of the stock market, those that can actually buy the thousands of shares necessary to have any sort of return, they're making money off of my back right now. Mm-hmm. You know, and so I sold it and I was like, yeah, you're going to see a negative stock on there by like 5 stocks. But
there you go.
But it's like the idea of going back to the GDP, going back to our entire economic system in this country. We have our measurements and we have our values all in the wrong places. All in the wrong places. I mean, even our GDP, they said our GDP is rising. You know why? Our GDP is increasing because they added billions of dollars in military spending, and a major part of GDP is military spending. We didn't need any of that military spending in this last coronavirus stimulus bill.
Right.
Well, and let's face it.
Why do we need tanks?
Exactly. We're stuck in the narrative of a madman that literally sees, you know, the economy and things like that and how well he spends money as his primary skill. And so in some ways, I don't doubt for a second that literally everything he does is to make himself look good. And that's where that comes from.
Though. But I think that's like, this is in this, I mean, like you have President Obama that would say that having a national deficit was dangerous, when in fact that's not even true. Yeah. A national deficit shows that the government is investing probably not in the right places. The fact that the government wasn't investing in the people is what was dangerous, but having a deficit is not dangerous. And so I think that going back, it's like across the board, Republicans, Democrats, you name it, unless you actually have a modern monetary theory mentality of how our economy works, you're going to be looking at, like, how do you maintain the GDP? How do you maintain high, like, rising stock prices? How do we make sure that these CEOs aren't going to, lose $1 billion this week?
Yeah. So, we're getting close to wrapping up, but I'm very intrigued to hear. So what's kind of next for you? Are you going to try again? You are going to focus on the private sector, the public sector? Undecided right now.
Do you need a little bit of a break before you try and sort that out?
Well, Isla, the burnout you're talking about is real.
Yeah.
Like we fight, and we, many times how many of our comrades have we seen completely burn out, completely, where they're not even doing any of this type of work anymore? And so, as far as running for office, I don't know. I mean, the door's not shut, but I'm also not filing paperwork. I'm still leading my organization. And, one of the exciting things is that we're getting ready to do some cleanup of some really hateful Colorado policy in the next legislative session. So, that's stuff that I'll keep working on and keep trying to do the little bit that I can to help make people's lives just a little bit easier.
Well, and let us know, like, send us any information on how people can participate or get involved, and we'll include that in our show notes and
awesome
link to it. So
yeah, and I think I'm personally all for that. I admit I'm burned out from trying to participate in certain political activities to a point where I know I completely see where you're coming from about, like, well, I'm just going to focus on this one thing. And if I make 5 people's lives better tomorrow, good.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I just took on my company, which is a, totally hip Silicon Valley startup and definitely more diverse than anywhere else I've ever worked before, just created a diversity and inclusion task force. And I immediately jumped on it.
Right on.
A good portion of the people that I work with knew I had a podcast and knew it was something I was passionate about. But now suddenly the CEO is like, oh, wow, I didn't know you were into that. I'm going to check out your podcast. And it's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to think globally and act locally for a minute.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
So, just as a general encouragement to any listener, yeah, it's okay. Not everything you do is going to go change the world, but do small things, it adds up. So.
Well, and share the podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that like, I mean, he shared it with his work. You could share it with anyone you want, and we would not in any way be sad. In fact, happy.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is also each one of us, like, we all have very different talents and contributions that we can lend to helping to make lives better for everybody. And I think what's important is that we need to do what we can and then do just a little bit more, but not do so much that we can't do more tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think that's just, we're not doing anyone any good if we just run ourselves into the ground.
Yeah. Well, when I was working at this center, that was my mantra with my staff and my volunteers, the people who were, you could see they were just going to like fall over because they're putting so much into it. And I was like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You got to pace yourself or we're going to lose you and we need you. Like it's a selfish thing in some ways. Like, yeah, I want to take care of you. And it's because I want more of us to be here at mile 20 because we need that.
And I think sometimes we feel guilty with stopping and grabbing a glass of water, but we shouldn't. I mean, think about it. Let's say you're like in this like 100-mile bike race and then your tire pops. Are you going to pull over and change your tire? I hope so, because you're not going to finish the race if you're going to keep trying biking with a flat tire.
Right. Yep, exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time and your wisdom and as Eric has already said, we're definitely going to have you back because we've already got a topic.
What did we talk about today? I feel like we were talking about like 20 different things, but it was all good.
Honestly, I feel like today's topic's kind of, it was your experience as being a candidate in the Senate and kind of where things are at. I am loving right now because of just how chaotic things are, just getting different perspectives on the show without even having a direction. So thank you for that. It was perfect.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here and share this space with you.
And on that note, we're going to say thanks for listening. If you have ideas, feedback, thoughts, please find us on social media. We are BiCurean on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can give us a call at 303-578. Oh, we just changed that number and I can't read that.
303-578-9155.
There we go. I still need to work on reading Isla's handwriting. And you can always email us at podcast@BiCurean.com.
And if you like what we are doing, please rate us on your listening platform of choice.
Thank you.